Richard Fry. Pam Gould here. Diane Carper here. Todd Legacy is not here tonight. Carol Lant here. Tom Philpott here. Catherine Shornick here. And we have one open position. Thank you so much. Can we stand for the flag salute and a moment of silence as we bring our best selves to this meeting tonight? I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty, justice, for all. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to welcome the committee members that are all here tonight. We really appreciate it. County staff all had other agreements except for Ben Ellenboss, who is here on Zoom. Thank you, Ben. We really appreciate your coming.
Thanks for having me.
Even the Gary Poole, the senior master of the ferry, was unable to attend tonight because of fire training that he had to do, but he did share a couple things that I will share with you. And I'd also like to welcome the community members that are all here and the community members on Zoom. We really do appreciate you coming and to be here because we have a lot of information tonight. Does there anyone have any adjustments to the agenda that they want to make any changes for? If not, we'll accept the agenda as it is. The next order of business, we need to adopt our minutes from our meetings on 2/8 and 2/15. Does anyone have any amendments or changes to the minutes that were distributed with the packet earlier in the week before the meeting? I hear no amendments, so those 2 minutes will stand as published as final. So next is the news from our senior master. One thing that Gary shared with me today is that this year, because we have proposed almost a month of dry dock, they are going to deploy the heavy aluminum long ramp that we have stored in the parking lot area for egress onto the docks on the Lummi side for sure. And they may do the same thing on the other side, depending on how the setup is. But we know from the Lummi side last year, there were some very, very low tides. It was extremely challenging to get down the ramp on your feet when it was raining. And so the handrails on that ramp really make it a lot safer. And he said the county was going to do that this year. One other thing I learned from Gary today is that many people have asked, why do they take the boat all the way to Seattle for dry dock? And why don't they use the dry dock that is here in Bellingham? But as it turns out, what looks like a dry dock here in Bellingham is not a dry dock. That dry dock company moved to Everett, and while they do boat work there, it is not a dry dock that is equipped to pull the whole ferry out of the water and work on it. So that is why they take it to Bellingham. Numerous people have asked us that. So with that, I think we're finished with our business meeting. We have a lot to do on our committee work. The very first thing that we're going to talk about is the resolution requesting the county council approval of the interpretation and retroactive application of accounting of Whatcom County Council Chapter 10.30, use of ferry rates. And Janice Holmes is going to talk about that tonight. I am going to take you to.
We're back. Okay.
As they're setting up their computers, Janice is going to talk to us tonight about the lease agreement that the county
Don't worry about
signed with the Lummi Nation. And the lease agreement that we have to use the tidelands on the Lummi Nation is
There
paid
it goes. Okay.
out of the ferry system every year. It's an increasing amount. It goes up over time. And Janice is going to talk to you a little more about that issue.
Thanks. Okay, so at the last meeting here, or actually the February 8th meeting, I handed out and presented to the committee an analysis of the lease accounting. There are two leases with the Lummi Nation. There's a Tidelands lease and an Uplands lease. And the Tidelands lease is the one in question. And following the meeting, I spoke briefly with John Scanlon, who asked that I forward this information to the rest of the council, which I did, as well as to the executive office. So I did that as well. And when these leases were entered into, the lease payment for the Tidelands lease was $200,000 annually with a CPI increase. And on this graph, you can see the bottom line is the lease payments. Is that correct, Diane?
Turquoise.
The turquoise line. I can't really see the colors. That's why the turquoise line is the lease payments that started out at $200,000 annually and gradually has escalated now to, I think it's around 250,000. Is it 287 now? So it's gradually continuing to increase. And then the other line that mirrors that is the amount of that lease payment that needs to be covered by fare box revenue in the previous interpretation. And then the sharply ascending line is the amount that fare box revenue has covered cumulatively since the lease was entered into. And that is currently sits at about $1.7 million that should not have been paid by fare box revenue under the county charter governing leases of this nature, as well as the government accounting standards. So what this resolution does is acknowledge that these payments should not have been covered by fare box revenue, and that essentially that money should be returned to the ferry system fund. And that's all that this resolution does. It does not suggest in the manner in which those should be returned, but it is an acknowledgement that those monies were taken to something that is capital and should now be returned. And one manner in which this could happen, nobody certainly expects it to happen overnight, likely to happen over a period of time. And one thought I would suggest to the committee on how that could happen is that it be returned for the next few years. The difference in the fare box revenue and the fare box goal could be covered by this over the next few years while the rest of the financial information is sorted out, financials surrounding the new ferry, and there's still a lot of other financial information to get into. And what that would do, in essence, is absolve the need for any sort of fare increase at this time until those things were sorted out. So that's just one suggestion on how that could be made. But the resolution does not get into that kind of detail. It simply is an acknowledgement that these were not collected properly as part of fare box costs. And so it should be recredited back to the fare box. So,
Janice, tell us what the resolution does.
It's a policy document from the council that directs it would, in this case, direct Public Works to take an action consistent with the policy that they've laid out. And the policy that is being laid out here is that the Tidelands lease payments should not be covered by fare box revenue.
So we
Yeah.
we did send out a copy of this resolution with the packet to the committee. Would you like me to read the resolution out before we vote whether or not to pass it ahead to the county council?
Pam, can I say one
Yeah.
other thing? Sorry. The one that went out to the committee had a typo that has since been corrected.
Gotcha.
So I have hard copies of the corrected version, should anyone want one. It was a small typo on the first page. Thanks to Bob for catching it. So.
Okay, so committee, what do you think? Shall I read it? It's not too long, but it lays out pretty clearly what it is we're voting on. You don't think we need to read it? You can see it on your computer screen. You're right. It was right there.
Oh, I stopped it. Sorry.
Can you restart it? Do I have to share again?
Yeah, you shared it. I'm sorry. I thought you were done here. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And just for anyone who's here, I do have extra copies that I'll leave on the table for
Oh, perfect.
anyone who.
Perfect. Okey doke. So, committee, since everyone is familiar with this resolution, we've talked about this before. You had a chance to read over it. It's a fairly clear issue. Even the county executive was quoted at a meeting recently saying that we may need to pay this money back over a 10-year period. And the reality is the fare box, the money that our fares, has accumulated, gave the road fund a $1.7 million loan over the last 10 years, money that they had been using. And so it's hard for them to pull that amount of money out of the road fund, but that amount of money will need to come back to us from the road fund. So I guess what I will ask the committee now is, can you signify by saying aye? Yeah, I'll read the motion. Requesting the council approval of the interpretation and retroactive application of accounting of Whatcom County Council Chapter 10.30.030, use of ferry rates.
You can't. You can't. Oh, I guess I'm going to, unless Catherine.
Is this not the right one?
Somebody else wants to make-
You're the
Oh, I am
chair.
the chair, so I can do it. I'm sorry.
You have to. We'll get this down one of these days. Okay, I move that the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee adopt this resolution regarding the council approval of the interpretation and retroactive application of accounting of Whatcom County Code Chapter 10.34.030, use of ferry rates, and send it to the council asking them to adopt it.
The resolution has been moved and seconded. Can you signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Anyone, in all nay? The motion carries by unanimous.
Ma'am.
So the motion carries by a unanimous vote, as brought forward by Diane Harper and seconded by Tom Philpott. Okay, so next order of business, we've been working hard during the last 3 or maybe 3 weeks, I think, amazingly, towards rewriting the ferry codes ordinance, which the county council proposed, well, Public Works made a ferry code proposal last year. It was passed by the county council, and then the executive vetoed it later in the year. So this is another proposal that we are going to pass. I'm sorry, just 1 minute. Pardon me?
Ben is raising it.
Oh, sure. Ben, would you like to say something?
But you have to,
Yeah, point of order, Madam Chair.
Just,
yeah, tell them something.
can you please hold on, Ben? We just have to we have kind of a funny arrangement here, but we're gonna. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my point of order would be that typically after you have a motion and a second, you would open the floor for discussion, and I didn't hear you open the floor for discussion on the motion.
Good point, thank you. You think we should repeat that?
I would say that's up to the body, but I'm typically, you have a motion and a second, then you open the floor. And
Right.
after discussion is closed, then you would call for a vote.
Thank you so much. We will go ahead and do that. Okay. We're gonna, just 1 second. Okay, we will start over. Does someone have a motion?
Okay,
You've got the motion. You just need to open it for discussion.
We just have to open it for this. We don't have to go start over the whole thing. Okay. So can I open this motion for discussion in the hall and among the committee and from anyone in Zoom? Oh, no, it's just it's a discussion just among the committee. It's not among everyone. Oh, got you. Is there any discussion among the committee about this motion? Seeing no discussion. Oh,
I would just say that we talked about this quite a bit at our last meeting. So we aren't,
and
I
that
want to
meeting,
register for the minutes that we're not doing this without thoroughly looking at it, because we did
at our meeting on the
on the
15th.
codes at our meeting on February 8th
No, 15.
and the 15th.
Yeah. Both. So this is our third meeting for this month. It's been really busy. We had a meeting on the 8th, on the 15th, and again tonight. And this issue was discussed at both of those former meetings. And so seeing no discussion, shall we take another vote? All those in favor of the resolution being discussed, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next order of business, we're going to be talking about the Whatcom County Code Chapter 10.34, the ferry rates proposal. We created an ad hoc committee to help rewrite the ferry code proposal that we were going to bring forward to Public Works. And Diane Harper is going to tell us a little bit more about the fine points of the proposal.
On our meeting on February 8th, everyone got a 3-part analysis showing on the left-hand column the existing code, in the middle column Public Works version 3. They gave us 3 options of code revisions, and 3 had the most detail in it. And the right-hand column provided the ad hoc committee's comments on what we thought needed to be fixed. What went out with the minutes this time was a 3-column with the agenda. Was 3 columns that has the existing code, and the left column, the ad hoc committee's proposal in the middle column and our commentary on why we are proposing what we're proposing in the right-hand column. And so in discussion of last week, we went over a number of housekeeping type amendments, and most of what the ad hoc committee had recommended as far as housekeeping went ahead. We did find a few areas where we needed to make some changes where people had pointed things out to us. So the big issues, however, are policy issues where a change in the code would change the county policy, not housekeeping amendments. And so I want to just mention a couple of those. I'm going to show you a couple of slides on those, and then we can talk about it.
Want to share?
I don't know why it quits.
I'm good with it.
Oh, you're doing it to me.
I
Well,
see your face.
okay, well, I'm back to sharing, I think.
Yes.
Can I page forward? I know, and why can't I go forward? Oh, boy. It doesn't look like I'm actually in PowerPoint. It looks like it's stuck. Yeah. Yes, good.
Okay, all I did was click on it. So.
Okay, I didn't
Maybe
click
that's
hard enough. All right, so I'm gonna do a little basic, all of you have heard me say this 4 times and already at 4 meetings. I guess I'm gonna lead in by apologizing because what was supposed to happen was I was supposed to do codes, and then because I really got into this whole thing because my interest in fairs, I insisted that I was going to do fairs, which were going to come up in July, but they've come up already. So you're going to just have to put up with hearing from me tonight. What determines the cost of fairs? As we've talked about before, the big issue has been what is included in operating costs. And the existing definition means all actual daily running expenses and all actual regular and routine maintenance and administrative expenses. Fair user fees pay 55% of the adjusted total operating expenses. And how they have been adjusted in the past is simply to deduct other streams of revenue. So we have our total operating expenses, and then we subtract out revenue that comes from outside. Then we pay 55% of the remainder. Because of this ongoing issue and another big issue that has emerged in the last 2 years, we are suggesting that some other things be subtracted before the 55% is calculated. I have a big history here, total operational expenses. I want to just point out that there's 10% there that's for the Gooseberry Dock and lease, and so that now would go down to about 1%. And that 40% at the bottom, which is the vessel, dry dock fuel and repairs, has gone up in the past 3 years from $600,000 a year to projected this year at 1.26 million. And I would just say that no system with an income of about 1.5 million can sustain an increase of $660,000 over 3 years. Now it's true, we only have to pay 55% of that, but 330,000 is still a pretty big lump along with some other increased costs. So the history that we gave you last fall in September and at our December meeting is history. This is now our issue with how much fairs need to put into the system. The equipment rental and revolving fund owns the ferry, and we pay that fund rent. We don't really know what those expenses are, but occasionally Public Works Accounting will give us a breakdown. And so for the years that I have a breakdown, I'm showing you fuel on the bottom. As you might guess, the fuel, the beige bar jumps up and down. The top bar is parts oil labor, and it's pretty consistent. The biggie is the dry dock, and dry dock also includes dry dock related services. You pay some professional consulting, service engineering, and so forth along with that. I want you to notice that the red line are the actual costs. We have those for the years 2006 through 2008, and we have the actual cost 2018 and the projected cost for 2024. And then the blue line is the rent that we pay. And as you might guess, it's really hard to figure these things out ahead and get an exact number. And so some years we're low in rent and some years we're high in rent, and we rely on the equipment rental and revolving fund to even that out. But as you can see, both the red and the blue lines are headed straight up. And that's an issue for how much fares can pay. If you get a 20% increase in costs, can you manage a 20% increase in fares? It's a good question. So we wanted to address that in the code, and it's something that hasn't come up before. The other one is our infamous graph.
So if there's a 20% increase, they're about 5%. So that's fair, that's what
No,
Keep it simply.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I can repeat the question, but it was a math question about if the expenses go up. And so let me just try to answer it by restating what I probably should have said. The expenses have gone up, have doubled. And if there is a real issue in how fast you can make fares go up and still get increased revenue. And at a certain point, even though you raise the fares 20%, you may not get 20% additional revenue. Or if you raise the fares 40%, you're very unlikely to get 40% additional revenue. Yeah. So anyway, that's a problem that we addressed in the code. Yes.
Go ahead.
Turn the microphone. Turn the microphone around.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Hey, so I just wanted to make one suggestion, and it's about the meeting and not about the content of the meeting, and that would be that anybody in the room that has the speakers, make sure that both your microphone and your speaker on your device is muted, because out here in Never Never Land, it's miserable trying to listen to this because there's so many echoes. So there's a microphone mute, and then your device's speaker. If you're in the room with the broadcasting speaker, your device's speaker should be muted on anybody who has a device active in the room with the main speaker.
Thank you.
Maybe that'll help clear up the echo and the background noise, hopefully.
Just one other quick point, and that is we hope that these expenses are going to go back down to more the traditional $600,000 a year level, but it's an aging boat. So we really don't know what kinds of expenses that there will be in keeping it running. The next graph is my infamous graph with the red dotted line. I'm not going to belabor this one other than to say those were the dolphin expenses, and that's the other policy issue of what kinds of major repairs that are not regular and routine, how do those get paid for? And this is the proposed code language, and my title says it's debatable. And it is debatable. I'm pretty sure Public Works will want to debate it. We tried to develop a financial measurement that would escalate over time in a reasonable manner, so you wouldn't have to go back and change 150,000 to 160,000 and so forth. And our big concern, why would we want to limit expenses? And the answer is what we want a stable fare system. It's not that fares can't go up. In fact, tonight we'll be talking about 15% fare increase. It's that we can't expect a system that is built upon collecting fares to suddenly one year have a 20% higher fare and the next year, oh no, we don't need that money this year, we'll take it down again. So there is kind of a running fund where ups and downs can be accommodated, but when we have what we have in the past few years of a consistently increasing number of very expensive repairs added into the system, we don't see that fares can keep up. So these two suggestions are that once you get your total operating expenses and you've included all of these major repairs of our aging infrastructure, then what you do is you subtract from that total a certain amount to get the adjusted operating expenses. And it's the adjusted operating expenses that you multiply by 55% to get how much fares we need to pay. And the two suggestions are that instead of the regular and routine being on one end and capital being on the other end, that there is a middle ground that's called major or emergency repairs. And that we felt that fares could reasonably take on 5% of our annual revenue. So if, for instance, our annual revenue in past years has been about 1.5 million, 5% would be about 75,000. So we're saying if you have a major or emergency repair that costs 300,000, charge 75,000 of it into the adjusted total operating expenses, but the rest of it will have to be paid elsewhere because we need a stable and consistent set of fares. Similarly, that graph I showed you on the ER&R funds, we looked again at what reasonably, how fast can fares escalate reasonably and expect us to not lose people, lose riders. And the number that we came up with is that if your vessel rental fees are greater than 50% of your income from fares, then that's too much. That's a cost that should not be included in the fare calculation. Now, Public Works approached this from the opposite direction. They didn't deal with the ER&R. I think it surprised them how much those costs are running. But they knew that the dolphins were an issue, and their suggestion was the reverse, that the major or emergency repairs that the road fund would kick in 150,000 and the fares would handle the rest. And we simply say the 5% is debatable, but what's not debatable is you can't, in a fare system, in a fare system, you can't have unknown amounts of sudden and large costs dumped in it. So the limit has to be on what the fares pay, not on what the road fund pays. So that's really the heart of where I think it's going to be difficult for the road fund. I'll just give you a tidbit. We, until this year, took in about $1.5 million in fare revenue every year. The road fund gets about $21 million, $22 million of property taxes from the unincorporated area. So it's not a lot of money on either side to be covering these kinds of expenses. Now, I don't want you to get excited about this graph because it's fake. I want to say that again. These are fake numbers. I wanted to give you an example. And next month, we will talk about the real numbers. But what this shows is what happens when you have a system where for 20 years, you keep on taking in fair revenue in excess of what you needed to pay. And then all of a sudden you start having major expenses and you use up all of that revenue and you go into the negative territory. And right now, the way the existing code reads, it just says, when you go below zero, then you should look at a fair increase. And what we are saying is we need some tighter information than that. We need to know how far in advance. Janice actually listened to the county council meetings where they discussed this issue. And one of the things that was said was like, oh, you could run a deficit for 3 years, you know? Well, if it's only 20,000 a year, sure. If it's 400,000 a year, not so much. So we have some proposed language. When should fares be changed? After 3 sequential years of the annual total of ferry user fees not reaching 55%, or 3 sequential years of the annual total of ferry user fees being greater than 55%, a change in ferry rates and services provided shall be considered, whatever the balance is in the cumulative fare box reserve. And most of you are familiar with that term. It's where the money goes that when we do pay more than 55% each year. So the second one is an interesting one. We're saying, but at any time that you get more than a full year of revenue sitting there in your bank account, you need to lower fares. Or any time that the negative balance is greater than 4 months of fare. And how did we pick 4 months? We looked at what happened during COVID. We thought that was probably a worst case. And that was about 3 months of revenue. So if we went 4 months under, then we need to start making it up. I'm going to come in later with a suggested amendment to that, because if and when the lease payment is taken care of, all of a sudden we'll go above a year of fare revenue. And so the amendment that I will propose would hopefully deal with that. Okay. The committee members have this document, and it was in the agenda online. If you pull the agenda off of the county website, this was attached, so you would be able to look at it. Unfortunately, to make it readable, it takes 14-inch wide paper, so it's not very easy for you to print at home. Oh, okay. So all of the committee members have been through this February 8th, and then most of us were able to attend the meeting last week on February 15th. And so rather than go through every single change, the only one I want to point out is at our meeting last week, we saw some difficulties with some of the definitions. And so if you look on page 2, for those of you who don't have it, we tried to simplify the definitions that Public Works had proposed. And the way that we've done that, and I will read it. The fare box recovery goal means the amount ferry user fees are to pay to support the ferry system, and is calculated by multiplying adjusted total operating expenses by the fare box recovery rate. Then the next, cumulative fare box reserve, and that's new, it's not in the existing code either. Cumulative fare box reserve is the running total of adding the annual difference between ferry user fees and the fare box recovery goal. When the goal is larger than the total ferry user fees collected, the difference is a deficit and is subtracted. When the total ferry user fees collected is greater than the goal, the difference is a surplus and is added. And that's the change from the wording that you saw last week. Questions?
You mind putting up the previous slide?
I'm being asked to put up the prior slide. That one, or you want to go one more? Okay.
I'm just trying to get a handle on what triggers their increase. And my question is whether you have to meet the requirements in order to consider their increase. And then you move to E to determine whether you don't have a fair increase. And the other part of the question is, can you just delete E and go to E?
Okay, here's the question, is after, when you're looking at D and then you move on to E, couldn't we just use E and not have D? The reason that we want D is because we had a period of time where we were gaining fares, where we had excess fares every year. And we wanted it in kind of enforced, I mean, this is code, that if you have 3 sequential years, you have to take a look at it and you have to make a judgment call then on whether or not that seems to be something that's going to continue. So I think both of these are important, that we say you have to look at it after 3 years of deficits or 3 years of surpluses. And then that you have an absolute point where you can't just keep accumulating excess funds, or you can't just keep going deficit. You have to actually do something.
Thank you. The current code says annually, and the county says annually.
Yeah, the county and and later in this code, it does say that they'll look at it annually to see how we're doing. I guess we just wanted to emphasize that even though they were looking at it annually, they hadn't figured out that we had a surplus 3 years running. Other questions or comments because of the way that we operate? This is an opportunity also for those of you in attendance to ask questions, and the Zoom audience.
I think this really question, what the quality of what has come out from.
That way I don't have to repeat it.
I just wanted to note and acknowledge the quality of this work that's working on the WCFAC members. It's really refreshing to know that you're thinking with such great foresight, covering all the issues that have been percolating in the last year, avoiding the items, concerns about fares. We're in good hands.
Thank you on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, I can certainly second that. I guess what comes to mind as I read these changes is that I would assume Public Works will have a lot to say about them. And I wonder to what extent Public Works.
Get away from the speaker.
Over here? Okay. All right, am I good here?
Yeah.
I was just saying that there are many changes. You didn't go through all of them, but a lot of the wording and definitions are pretty substantial policy adjustments, I'll call them, in some cases changes. And I wonder the extent to which Public Works has received this draft. This is an initial draft. I know you're not going to finally vote today. And if you've had any feedback yet, or how you anticipate interacting with Public Works during the time between now and the next meeting on March, whatever it is.
14th. Well, we were very pleased and fortunate to have Director Liz Cosa here with us last week, or 2 weeks ago. It's all kind of blending together. So 2 weeks ago, she was here and got the handout that showed the 3 columns that showed the existing code, the Public Works proposal, which I understand that she herself had done some work on, and our comments And she made a great catch. We were complaining because there was a new piece of code that Public Works had inserted about how someone bringing a hearse onto the island wouldn't have to pay ferry fares. And we said, hey, you know, whether you're dead or alive, you do not pay leaving the island, you know, and every commercial venture pays to come onto the island. And she pointed out, oops, we meant after hours. This was a humanitarian kind gesture so that when a family member died, they didn't have to pay $600 to go ahead and have the hearse come onto the island in the middle of the night. And so that got a great laugh in the audience. But anyway, we enjoyed her presence. And so she has heard most of this commentary. This new one on the equipment rental and revolving fund will be new to her. And I look forward to sending this on. The actual process is we as a committee cannot look at something and vote on it at the same night that is an action, a review, a recommendation directly to the council. And so we will come back to this on March 14th. If we make any changes between now and March 14th, then we will not be able to adopt it March 14th. We will have to wait again until a following meeting. So I know there are a couple of amendments lingering out there that people want to make, and we need to consider those tonight. And then whatever we end up with tonight, we will make sure to directly send on to Public Works so they have it. It's just, it will not be officially transmitted to council until our March 14th meeting.
Thank you.
Amendments? Rich?
So we have an amendment in the House, and Rich Fry is going to come up and propose his amendment. Rich?
Okay. So, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, no, yes, okay. Can't hear me,
You're speaking on my computer.
okay. All right, so. To digress for a moment, to my way of thinking, the most important definition in the code is the one. Oh, okay. Okay, I see. I see. Okay, on that little picture up there. Okay. Is the definition of regular and routine as being the criterion which define see copy of it here. Regular and routine as the definition of maintenance charges which can be charged against fares. And what we've seen and been discussing around tonight and for many weeks, actually most of the last year and a half, is the fact that as the Whatcom Chief and its infrastructure wear out, these things have to be repaired or replaced. And the question has come up and never been quite answered about how do we define what's regular and routine? So I've been working on this for a long time, and I was playing around with some numbers sometime in the past week, and I was looking at normal curve and some statistical definitions. And I came up with something that I thought looked intriguing, and then I did some more research and I found that it's actually a statistic, and it's very often used, and it is called the coefficient of variation. And what it is, so any distribution of numbers can be transformed into a normal distribution so that you can see how far or how closely the distribution is to a normal normal curve. And in that process, you calculate you can do this in Excel or any other statistics program. You can take any set of numbers, whether it's the height of number of people or their weight, and you can find out about that distribution by computing two things. One is the mean, which is just the average. And you also want to measure the distance of each observation from that mean. And from those, you can compute, we all know how to get the average, the mean. And there's a complicated formula for computing standard deviation. But essentially, under a normal curve, the standard deviation, the mean is the central, it's a bell-shaped curve. The top of the bell marks the mean. And then the shape of the curve and the tails define the standard deviation. And so I put together a table of computations of this particular statistic, which is called the coefficient of variation for the years 2013 through 2023. And what's interesting is that when, this is really hard to explain. Let's just say you come up with a number. So what we have for 2013, we have a number. So basically let's put it this way. Over those 11 years, the coefficient of variation goes from a low of 1.1 in 2014 to 2.48 in 2018 to 4.52 in 2022 and 5.61 in 2023. So generally speaking, this is what the number gives you is how far out of line these numbers are. And it also shows that, well, let's cut to the chase. If we compute the coefficient of variation at the end of every year, then pretty much if it's 2.0 or below, generally speaking, I think we could be relatively comfortable that all the expenses in there we consider regular and routine. If it's over 2.0, then we should look very closely at any of those expenses because one, they raise the mean for the following year, and essentially they raise the mean for the following year. Let's just put it that way. So if we come up with a regulation or code wording that introduces the coefficient of variation as a computation that's done at the end of every year, if that number is over 2.0, then we take a look at it and we look for outlying costs that are exorbitantly high. As for example, 2022 and 23 show us with 4.52 and 5.61. So those, anyway, let's just leave it at that. So to that end, what I propose is amending the definition of total operating expenses by adding a little bit. So total operating expenses means all actually daily running expenses and all actual regular and routine maintenance and administrative expenses associated with the use and operation of all physical elements of the ferry system.
Is that on your paper?
Yeah.
That's the existing language. For each year's expenses, the coefficient of variation will be calculated for all costs charged against fare box receipts and may not exceed 2.0 for any year. And then there's a second part to that where coefficient of variation is defined as the ratio of the standard deviation of the year's total operating expenses divided by its mean. So that's the proposed change, and that's the rationale for the proposed change.
Question?
Yeah.
I have to share the mic.
Yeah,
My concern would be, given the definition that we've done of major or emergency repairs, is there any way to tell whether or not adopting this definition would create a gap between the two where we would again be kind of in limbo?
do you have a scenario where that would be the case?
I'm asking because I don't know.
So and to some degree, I think these changes are something of a substitute for that approach. And in that, if we have a metric, then, and we all agree on it, then we just follow the metric.
May I add a comment yeah, I think it's a good question, Diane. And I think this idea of creating this third category that is neither capital nor regular routine operating expenses that are extraordinary, they're high, this is a good metric by which that category gets defined, gets bounced out of the fare box and or can be permitted into the fare box under constrained caps of sorts or amortized or something like that. But, because I would add that Rich's idea here, this metric that's being used or proposed, is actually used a lot in the law. This concept has been used by all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, for example, in Title VII disparate impact race cases, where the employer has a facially neutral policy that he applies, or the employer applies to the workforce, and people come along and say, well, that policy has a disparate impact on a particular race group. And the question then becomes, when does the threshold get crossed such that Title VII would apply and say that facially neutral policy, facially neutral in terms of race, that policy would nevertheless be classified as discriminatory on the basis of race, even though it's facially neutral, when it exceeds 2 standard deviations of disparate impact. And this has been actually incorporated into the law. It's used reliably.
So we have to.
Okay.
So I would agree with, I've forgotten, Rich or Peter, in saying that we need one or the other. And this is a very specific definition. And so if we wish to adopt this amendment on total operating expenses, then we should then, under major or emergency repairs, which is the new definition, get rid of our prior proposal of 5% of fare revenue as the comp. My concern would be, this does not strike me as something that is sort of typical for what the county council adopts. And excuse me, Ben, if I misspeak.
My name is Jan Cottrell. I'm just new to the committee, but I was really engaged with this presentation. First, we have Diane saying 3 years at a deficit, or 3 years not as a deficit triggers something. But this is an opportunity to use a mathematical equation to look at it year by year to see not only which way you're going, because you're going to know whether you have a deficit or not, but when it gets to be critical. When you go over 2 standard deviations, that is something that Public Works can see and that they can respond to before 3 years goes by. I think it's a very good tool that can be used if you can find someone who can calculate it. There's got to be somebody there who can do it, but it's doable. And you can see by the graph on the second page that as the expenses increase, that there will be a a point at which they have to act. And I like it.
Um,
So. I guess.
There was something else.
Other.
We're gonna have to move for
Yeah.
the
Other questions, I actually, one. Our difficulty is because of the speed at which the council wants us to move. We need to have this, the exact wording and everything perfected tonight. The rule is when we come back on March 14th, we can't tinker with this. And so, we're going to need to, act on whether or not to amend the ad hoc committee proposal. And I would make a motion that we adopt,
Done.
this new description, definition into total operating expenses, and that we alter our proposed major or emergency repair definition so as to use this also.
The trigger. The trigger.
Yeah. The way, can I get back to, I need to get back to, yeah.
So it would just be an addendum, sort of, I mean, it wouldn't change what you've already done.
It would change it, and I'm going back to that so I can read it aloud. Come on. Here we go. Right now, the definition of major or emergency repair expenses greater than 5% of the average of the past 3 years of total ferry user fees. And the amendment would change this to be beginning January 1st, 2024, major or emergency repair expenses greater than this coefficient of 2 would be included in major, how can I phrase that? Major emergency repair expenses are defined as any expense which is greater than the coefficient of 2. Help me, Rich. I got it. Is that
actually the standard deviation.
So
standard deviation of 2?
the thing I really like about having a metric is that there's no discussion. This is what you do. This is how you find out. If it's this, then this happens. If it's that, then that happens. And that I think it allows us to cut out a lot of that other stuff about emergency repairs and so forth and so on. And there's a lot of stuff there, but I think simple and a metric stops the arguments, or it changes them and it narrows them to a particular focus.
So
That's my.
I made a motion to amend the ad hoc committee's proposed revisions to Whatcom County Code Chapter 10.34. I am assuming, Rich, you just seconded.
All second. Okay.
If you say I.
Okay, well, you might not be able to second on that.
Yeah, so, okay, so Carol is seconding. Do we have discussion on?
We do have some discussion on this amendment.
Sorry. We have to avoid the speed.
Okay, I would say this is a really good direction. The only concern I have is I could tell what the liability would be for the ferry fare box in your computation of 5% of the average of the last 3 years. Diane gave us an example. I don't know what the 2% standard deviation would be. I mean, I think you as a committee might want to see what does that mean? Does that put a significantly higher burden on the fare box than the 5% proposal. I think that's an issue.
Following up, Mike, follow up on.
First,
Eventually we get data for.
yeah, and then we.
So we're not talking about a percent with the, if we have the metric, then the metric just comes up with a number for that year. Okay, and that 2.0, and I will, I didn't have enough paper to bring descriptions of this whole thing for everybody, but I can post it on Nextdoor. I can see that it gets posted somewhere where they can look at it. But basically,
How close to 5% is the standard deviation to?
How
It's a-
close to
it's a-
75,000?
so,
The current definition would say 75,000, 72,000, somewhere in that
Right.
range. That's the cutoff. So
what I'm,
would the
what
dollar
I'm,
amount
what
be?
I'm saying is we do away with all of that.
Right, but what would the dollar amount be
Still
for
be in the
two
back.
standard deviations?
The dollar amount,
The dollar amount.
Keeping in
well,
mind.
800, what we see is that $800,000 is, has an index of something like 5. Okay, so, and what that really means is that as you go out that bell-shaped curve, what you're talking about is, the meaning of it is that as you get toward the tails with things that are really high and happen really rarely, they flag it by jumping up that index to a number like 4 or 5. And so anytime you get past 2, you're starting to get to a place where it's not working.
But what's the dollar amount?
Exactly.
It's not a dollar amount.
Yeah, it does, it does, it's a certain number triggers that, and that is.
That's our concern. How, what cost of a repair?
Two standard deviations.
Yeah, what,
It's, okay. What it regulates,
Today.
rather than regulating an amount, it regulates the rate of change.
But we all want that transcribed into dollars.
yeah.
I like it.
Yeah,
I want a chance.
go ahead.
I want a chance to explain it from my point of view. The graph shows that as the expenses go up, the mean will change. And the standard deviations are based on the mean.
But today.
But today, when you said that you would get us the graph that shows the real amounts in deficits, that's where it could be calculated.
My point would be that the current definition says 5% of the last 3 years' annual revenue. And that is going to go up over time, hopefully, not down. But right now, today, 5% of the past 3 years is about $72,000. And so the definition as it stands says that anything that goes above that amount, we will not absorb into fares. And my question is, today, given the numbers today, what amount would we be absorbing into fares?
And may I try to answer that too? Because I don't think that we are asking to change the language that you have proposed for the excess or the deficit.
Major or emergency repairs.
Right, I don't think we're asking to change that language. We're only asking to approve a tool that will help Public Works to find out whether it's going in the right or the wrong direction. So.
I would just add, this is a very situation.
We have someone in the field that also wants to speak.
Oh, I thought, you told me to wait before. I'd asked, you told me to wait. Okay, yeah, no, this is a metric that accounts for the dynamic process of what's going on. So the trigger for what constitutes the extraordinary third category adjusts on a year-by-year basis based on the deviation, the standard deviation from the mean. So it's very accurate, it's very precise, and it's very, very reliable. And that's what makes it useful.
So can we approve this system as an addendum? Or
All you have to do is change those words in number 6, where it says greater than, instead of saying 5%, you use Rich's definition of the coefficient of variation.
no, that's still doesn't go around.
Yeah.
No, that would work, because it changes every year.
Well, so does the 5% of the average fare revenue. So the difficulty is I made a motion to substitute in this new metric. And we had a second. And we've had a fair amount of discussion on it, but we have somebody still on Zoom who wants to discuss. And
But I think it might be better if we do it. Okay. I'll try. Let's see if we can do this better. All right, Dave. Volume. All right, Dave, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can the committee hear me? Okay. I just want to make a brief comment. I'm not a statistician as Rich is, but I probably use statistics day in, day out as much as anybody in the room during my career. And two things strike me about this proposal. The first is that perhaps I misunderstood him, but Rich suggested to my ears that you could compute a mean and a standard deviation within a year, which of course you can't. You can only compute a standard deviation relative to other years. And so in this case, it would be some sort of running average.
Dave, just a second. Sorry, Dave.
Dave, just a second. We really want to hear your comment and we're having
Okay.
some technical stuff. Rich
Wait,
really wants to
hit
hear
that
it.
one.
Yeah.
And then you scroll it because I couldn't grab it. So I was
There.
Should we do it the other way?
No, we're good. Hold on. I'm trying. Get back to it. Can you try talking again, Dave?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My brief comment is twofold. The first is, based on what Rich said, I don't want anybody to get the impression that you can compute a standard deviation within a year. It has to be across years. So you're comparing 2024 to some prior number of years, 10, let's say, or some kind of running average. And so it's not a very robust data set for these kinds of computations. And the second is, if you look at Diane's graph and you look at the expenses over the last year, and it's not a bell-shaped curve. It looks like what Rich or I would call a log normal distribution or something like that. And so the use of the standard deviation as some sort of criteria to cut off plus or minus only works if the data conform to a bell-shaped curve. And I don't think in this instance they would. And then my second comment is I'm really struggling to understand his proposal without a concrete example with some numbers that we could see. I think this is what Diane is asking for, to compare it to using the 5% triggers. It's being presented in a very abstract manner to to my eye, and not in a
Yeah,
a tangible way that makes it easy to understand how it would work. That's my comment.
okay. So my response to that is that this is calculated by looking at a particular year's distribution of expenses. And that particular year is what we're measuring, what we're constructing a curve about. And the deviation from the mean of that set of data for that particular year, that set of costs, which go from 25 cents for some erasers to $800,000 for some dolphin repairs. So that's the set of data that we're talking about measuring at the end of each year, is the expenses for that particular year, which are going to vary from very large to very small. And that distribution is what changes each year. And that relationship between mu and sigma for that particular distribution for that year is where we get the statistic. So I will post on Nextdoor the data set for that. And so I hope that helps. It's not comparing different years. It's the index is for a particular year.
One suggestion to the committee.
We're going to have one more comment and then we're going to vote on this issue because we have a lot of work to do tonight. We are going to probably go over. It will probably be more like 8 to 8:30. The committee members said they could stay late. So just so you know. Okay, Bob.
My comment is that I think we're in a situation of that the perfect is the enemy of the good. I believe that the proposal that Rich has suggested has great merit, but it's complicated and it needs further study. This committee needs to take an action tonight, and I think you should follow the proposal for the MOER, the 5% variation from the last 3 years, and vote that forward and commit to doing further study. This can be a dynamic code. You've got to get something through that's going to back up the fare increase. And so I would urge you, with all due respect for the work that came through on the coefficient of variation, to go ahead with the proposal that was on the table. I withdraw your motion, my recommendation, Diane. Vote up what you have studied and you know the financial impact based on recent history. And then study this other one because it may very well be the perfect solution. But I think you've got a good one tonight. That's my opinion.
There's one more.
So can I'm not sure the procedure. Can I withdraw my motion?
You may withdraw your motion and make another one.
Okay. But I have an amendment I need to make. You're going to shoot me, I know, but.
Wait. First we have to deal.
Okay, I withdraw the motion to change what is in the ad hoc committee's proposal with the understanding that we will come back and study it, but we need to forward, and we will go ahead and forward this idea to Public Works, and perhaps they will choose to include it. This is not the end. In other words, we make a recommendation to the county council. Public Works makes their deal and the council decides.
Need your second to.
Oh, does the second agree to withdraw?
Yep.
And
The second
Carol
does agree.
is true.
Okay.
So,
Now we have an motion on the floor.
and I have an amendment.
Okay.
I hope this one is a little more straightforward. I am concerned that once we do have the cumulative fair return worked out, and there are 3 big issues on how much is going to be in that, we are going to be over my limit of the limit that I said. And so, can I get that up? Yes. So let me move forward again. Okay, so this E, ferry rates or services shall be changed at any time the cumulative fare box reserve has a positive balance greater than the total amount of the prior annual total of ferry user fees or a negative balance greater than could be funded by 1/3 of the total amount of the prior year ferry user fees. And my motion is to amend that by adding this phrase, or a comma after the fees, and say, not to be applied to the cumulative fare box reserve balance as of the adopting date of this ordinance. Not to be applied to the cumulative fare box reserve balance as of the adopting date of this ordinance. And the reason for that is this whole discussion of how is the 1.7 billion going to be paid back. If it shows in the balance, then we would immediately start a cycle of fare reductions, and that's not going to happen. So.
We don't want that. Do we have a second on Janice's motion? Excuse me, Diane. Sorry. Do we have a second on Diane? It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion about this motion?
Here, I don't know, it doesn't seem clear to me, I don't understand. Walk over.
Please. Yeah. Sorry. Do you need to share up?
Okay.
Okay.
They know what.
This is Carol.
So it says as of a certain date, it doesn't, but then when does it come into play again? Doesn't it negate all of E? I'm thinking that we don't know what the balance is going to be the date that this is adopted.
Right.
And that since we don't know, and since the balance has changed over $3 million up and down in the last year, that we don't want this to apply to that, because it's.
Would it be clearer to say as of 2025?
Okay, I will take that as a friendly amendment, not to be applied through the year 2025.
We have some comments for we continue to. We are going to have more comments
From the audience as we continue the discussion about Diane's motion.
Ben, I think you're able to go now. We can try.
Okay, I was just gonna suggest that once a motion has been properly moved and seconded, that it belongs to the body and that the body controls it, no longer the maker of the motion typically. And so I would suggest in situations like that, instead of withdrawing, that you would vote the motion down. But this is just talking about procedure and not this particular motion. I'm more referring to the last one that was moved and seconded and then withdrawn.
You want to say that back? It's,
Okay.
hold on, let me get it back so you won't cause problems. There you go.
Yeah, I'm the one who made the motion, and I'm just want to inform the committee that I am fine with you voting it down, and that there will be discussion with Public Works, I'm sure, and this is not the final, this is just what we're recommending. So I think from what Ben said, I can't withdraw it, but how about we just vote it down?
okay.
Yeah, and I'm more suggesting just to keep it clean in the future.
Referring to item E about when,
Not to be applied to
Yeah. When the item that had to do with when a fare increase or decrease has to be implemented. I'm not talking about Rich's motion. We're done with that. Okay. So. Oh, okay. Well,
That one has been.
So Rich's motion was withdrawn. And Diane's motion is still on the floor. Is there any more discussion about Diane's motion? Seeing no discussion, Diane's motion is the amendment to section D.
of 10.34.030.
Do you want her to read it again?
Would be a good idea since it's confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing. Go to the microphone.
Someday.
Okay, my motion was to amend item E on the screen in front of you by adding not to be applied to the cumulative fare box reserve balance as of the adopting date of this ordinance.
So,
And
there
a
any
friendly
discussion?
amendment changed it to not be applied through 2025. So both of them.
is there discussion about that amendment? No, seeing no discussion, all in favor say, oh, pardon me? Yeah, there was a motion and a second. There's no discussion. So all in favor of this motion, say aye.
No.
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 One more time. All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye. All against the motion signify by saying nay. Nay. The motion is not carried.
Okay, so I would now like to move that the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee adopt tonight. No, I should rephrase that.
Not being adopted.
Adopted. Is there a way we can ask if everybody would vote for this next time? Our problem is that if we change anything after tonight, then when we meet March 14th, we'll have to wait another month to adopt it. So what I'm trying to get at is, and let me, I'm going to not do a motion. I'm going to just ask the group, is there anyone who would not vote for this on March 14th? You wouldn't. Okay. Then we have nothing to send the council.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be
Excuse me.
unanimous.
Diane,
Oh, it doesn't have to be unanimous.
And it's not a vote tonight.
it is.
Yeah, okay.
So,
And then we voted on it.
I am so
We
sorry.
have our,
Changes between.
let me speak for a minute.
Is there an issue about a second reading?
No, okay, let me be clear. According to the Open Public Meetings Act, when you introduce an item that you intend to make a final vote on, you can introduce it, and then once it's complete, you know, you're not going to make changes. This is the item that we have introduced and that we will make a final vote on the 15th. You can't introduce the item and vote on it at the same meeting. So we have to make sure that this is the final draft of what we intend to vote on the 14th of March. And so that's what Diane was just trying to say. Are there any other amendments or anything else someone wants to put on there? It doesn't appear there is. And so this is as it stands and is printed, this is the version that will go forward as our suggestion to Public Works if we pass it on the 14th. Carol, do you have a question?
No, the second amendment that we discussed during all of this was to clarify if we get money back because of accounting,
Right,
and it would trigger E.
right.
What Diane was trying to do is see if we could hold off on triggering it. I needed clarification on that. I'm not sure.
I believe that what will happen is Public Works will fix that. All this is our recommendation to Public Works.
No, to county council.
Oh, excuse me, to the county council, not to Public Works. This is our recommendation to the county council. Public Works will probably make their own recommendation and they will fix that problem, I would imagine. Pardon me?
Like Congress's reconciliation.
Yeah, or the reconciliation, that might be what they do, exactly. So at this point, we're over our time and we have agreed among the committee that we are going to go through till 8:30. So we're going to continue to follow the agenda as it's listed, and because the county council intends to, or because the executive intends to suggest and bring forward, or he requested Public Works request a 15% increase in the ferry fares for Lummi Island this year. We are working on a fare balancing schedule so that if that 15% comes forward, it will rebalance some of the past unbalanced fares that were passed in 2015. They made, and Diane is going to explain that issue now and has slides to do that. And then we will talk more about a fair fares proposal that we can make to Public Works.
Thank you. Okay, here I am now talking about fares. We have these huge outstanding issues about how much is in the cumulative fare reserve. And if we have a whole bunch of money in the fare reserve, which I truly believe that we do, then we would not have to have a fare increase. However, I am not averse to this fare increase, and I will explain why. What has happened in the past 12 years? Well, in 2011, with a surcharge of $3, a vehicle driver trip became $13 instead of $10. Well, that was a nice little 30% increase. The passenger pedestrian cost per trip became $7. Well, that was a 75% increase over the existing $4 fare. And this has just continued forward. We now, if you stand on Gooseberry Point and you have a car and you have a friend, which one is cheaper for you to take on the ferry? And the answer is the car. It costs you $14 to take a car and driver on the ferry, a passenger car. How much does it cost to take a passenger? $8. Okay. So if I walk on the ferry by myself, I pay $8. If I walk on the ferry with a friend, I take my friend, I pay $16. But if instead I leave my friend on Gooseberry Point and I take my car, I only pay $14. This is just nuts. There is no other ferry system that charges more for people than they do for a car. So that's my personal little diatribe and why I got back into ferry issues 2 years ago.
Can I add one thing? In Diane's slide there, when the passenger fares went up 75%, the car and driver went up 30%, but a heavy truck you know, that maybe paid $50 went up 2% when they did that 3% increase on that $3 increase on every fare. So that's what we mean by rebalancing the fares.
Oops, unmute. Jerry Brown just reminded me that the $1 increase that we got in 2021 that goes towards capital, it did somewhat of the same thing. When you add $1 to every fare, then it really impacts a pedestrian much more than it does a heavy truck. Okay, so that's why I'm in this game. And let me give you some facts and figures. And since 2011, when we had that change, the cost of vessel operation, wages and benefits, that's our crew folks, is up about 36%. The Seattle-Tacoma CPI is up about 30%. The unincorporated road fund tax revenue went up by 22%, so they're hurting. They're not keeping up. And guess what? The total amount from ferry fares increased by 4%. Okay, so we haven't had enough gain in ridership to increase more than 4%. And that's an issue with the costs going up. Let's see if I can make this. Okay, so you've seen this slide in the other background information we gave you in meetings before. Fares pay 55% of operating expenses. I just wanted to put over there, past history is no guarantee of future performance, because what has actually happened is that our other sources of funds are going down. Here is what happened in 2023. Our money from the state, which used to average 15% or higher, is down. Our fare revenue is down for the first time, except for COVID. And last year, we took in approximately $474,000 less revenue than what the budget was. Okay.
Really, it's that number that triggered the executive to want a 15% increase.
So then this is kind of that same old graph, but this time what I want you to pay attention to is you see that steady green line. For years and years and years, ridership has stayed steady and revenue has stayed steady. And then COVID hit and we lost $358,000 that year, but we came right back up. But guess what? Now we are headed down. That's that red line I stuck on to the end of the green line. So why are we looking at a fare increase today? Ferry expenses in 2023 were 40% higher than in 2018. That's 5 years ago. Fare revenue in 2023 was 10% less than it was in 2018. The state subsidy in 2023 was $140,000 less than in 2018. And in 2023, the gap between 55% of operating expenses and fare revenue was $421,000. My point being, we may have a whole lot in the bank that we can draw on so that we don't go deficit, but in actual fact, expenses are increasing and fares at some point are going to have to catch up. And I personally prefer that we catch up gradually instead of with a 50% fare increase at some point in the future. I want to just throw this out real quickly. It's something that I hope we'll have an ad hoc long-term ferry viability committee this summer, is how do we manage in the long term? We are going to have a new boat. It may have lower maintenance, but unknown operating costs. If we kept on having costs that were higher than what fares could support, cutting service is not very good, because if you're cutting service, you're cutting the times when you have the least trips. So yes, you can get rid of some salaries, but you can't really lower the wear and tear on the boat. And then finally, what other counties are looking at, and no one has yet dared do, is there is the ability in state law to create a ferry district which collects taxes in the way that an electric utility does. You have a basic level that everyone pays, vacation homes, homes that are only occupied a few days of the year or may only generate 12 trips a year pay. And then also when you use the ferry, you pay. All of those things are things I think we're going to have to look at in the future. This giant cushion that I think we have that's going to keep us from having to have major fare increases in the next few years, it's not going to last forever. And we need to look at how we can make the expenses. All right, so that is my brief update on ferry finances. And because we're running over and because I know next month we're going to spend the whole meeting on this stuff, I'm going to ask you if you could possibly withhold your questions and let me move on to fares. Okay, fares. So the county executive has proposed a 15% fare increase immediately. And what I have done, because it's my thing, is, and I was on the 2011 committee that created the spreadsheet that Randy uses to generate fares. So he sent me his work yesterday and it looked really familiar. They've had to add on some columns because of the surcharge, but it's basically the spreadsheet that an accountant and I created in 2011. So with this news of a 15% fare increase, I set to work to see what that might mean. And I have three alternatives I'm going to show you. Public Works generally agrees that the pedestrian and passenger fare is way out of balance. And so this is also true in their proposal, and that is to leave the pedestrian passenger price the same and increase everything else by a constant percentage. Okay. But that doesn't help rebalance. So alternative B, leave pedestrian passenger price the same, but you apply the same discount to every kind of multi-trip card. In other words, right now, passenger multi-trip cards get a different discount rate from vehicle multi-trip cards, from motorcycle multi-trip cards. And C, my favorite, decrease the pedestrian passenger price to 33 to 40% of the vehicle driver price, and also apply the same discount to every trip price. Well, that's so much gobbledygook. What does that mean? Okay, what would two people in a car pay for a single trip? The current cost, if you buy what they used to call cash tickets, it's $22. If you both have 25 trip punch cards, it's $13.92. Proposal A, I give you proposal B. I'm going to focus on proposal C. The new cost, if you bought single trip tickets, would be $23, and that would be $2 more than today. I'm sorry, that's wrong. $1. If you're using 25 trip punch cards, then today the cost is $13.92, and under proposal C, it would be $15.48. So that's only a change of $1. So I'm traveling by myself. What's my single trip price? Well, passenger pedestrian, you're in luck if we go with C, because your price goes down from 8 to 6. But if you're in a vehicle driver and you have to pay cash, then your price goes up $3. It goes from 14 to 17. Hey, wait a minute. I have a punch card. I'm traveling by myself, but I'm using punch cards. In that case, your passenger pedestrian trip cost today is $4.52, and your vehicle driver cost today is $9.40. And under proposal C, the cost goes down for passenger pedestrian, and it goes up $1.84 per trip for your punch card. And by the way, I have a handout I'm going to give you guys, so you'll have all these figures. I'm just trying to rush through them so we can talk a little bit about it. So what would a 25 trip punch card cost? Well, today the passenger pedestrian 25 trips costs $113. And if we favor passenger pedestrians by lowering their fares, it would go down to $106, which is a $7 savings. Not huge, but that's dollars gets it down into the 33 to 40% ratio of what a vehicle driver costs. Meanwhile, I'm only interested in vehicle driver trips. That cost goes up from 235 to 281, which is a $46 increase. Okay, so people are always curious about the needs-based fares. A 15% increase in needs-based fares are basically 40 cents a trip for pedestrians and 80 cents a trip for vehicle drivers. So what does it cost me if I want to rebalance the fare system so I can bring a friend along cheaper than I can bring a car? And the answer is, it costs me about 56 cents less per trip if I bring my car and my friend both. And I pay via punch card, because the fact that I'm paying more for the vehicle, I'm paying less for the friend, and I pay less per trip. But it costs me about 25 cents more per trip if I'm alone in the car and using a punch card. And it costs me $1 more per trip if I'm alone in my car and I have to buy a single passage. And my argument would be that I think most of us that can afford to buy 25 trip punch cards can afford an extra 25 cents per trip. So I'm all in favor of C, but I have to point out the council may not be willing to consider lowering any fares when they are so concerned about rising costs. If the community is willing, we should propose lowering passenger fares, but there's no guarantees as to which alternative will be chosen. And tonight, of course, this is our very first blow by on this. We will come back to this March 14th, and I have a handout with all of these numbers on it. What I also have is I have the spreadsheets that have for each alternative the fare, the exact fare for every class, for heavy trucks, trailers, motorcycles. And I will print those, and I will see if there's a way to get them posted at the county level. I can personally put them in the Island Library notebook, where anyone who wanted to look and see what does a 15% fare increase look like? Well, here are 3 ways of calculating it in 3 different sets of fares. And now I have really.
And we can
hurried.
also make that available, Diane, on the our Lummi Island website,
Yes, yes.
but like a website, so that everyone can.
I want to go back to this premise that the county executive is going to propose a 15% fare increase. So what we are doing is we are not going to propose a 15% fare increase. What we are going to propose is a fairer fare structure that you would implement this fare increase with. And I don't want anyone to go away thinking that I'm asking this committee to endorse a 15% fare increase. But what I do want you to endorse is trying to rebalance the relationship between the different fare classes so that it makes a little more sense. I just want to mention briefly the other changes that Public Works is suggesting and that we could have an opinion on. They are saying no discount for trucks. They're still going to sell the 10-punch truck card, but they don't see a reason to give a discount to businesses. They want to discontinue the post-high school full-time student special rate, as no one has applied for it in many years. I can guarantee you that it's just a blank line on every spreadsheet. And finally, this one is a good one. Make all multi-trip punch cards the same number. In other words, now we have some that are 10 and some that are 25. They prefer 10. I can give you some good administrative reasons for why they would prefer 10. My friends and I are kind of like 25, but yeah, but one way or the other, it does make sense to try and standardize. And then 2 more questions and I'm done.
Is it the rationale, how do you handle the rationale for the 10 punch card versus 25 punch card? With the idea that the 10 punch card allows folks who are financially more strained
Exactly.
Yes.
Ride cars
Right,
first.
yeah. The big advantage of the 10 is it's much cheaper. And so, yeah, you don't have to fork over as much money. And if you think, well, you know, I'm going to give one to my daughter and she's only going to come 5 times this year, then a 10 makes a lot more sense than a 25.
It does make for many people whose income may be challenged, it's much easier to buy a 10 card punch than a 25 card punch. And if you want more, buy 2 or buy 3. You can buy as many as you want, but it equalizes out the break. Because if it's just a 25 punch card, a lot of people can't afford that, so they're paying more. And if there's a 10 punch card, it's easier for the county to compute and everybody has equal access.
Okay, just real briefly, I always get asked about a summer surcharge. We ran the numbers in 2011 and they're not a lot different in 2023. The premise of a summer surcharge, and the state does it the same way, is it's only on single passages. Nobody wants to mess around with trying to you use your punch card and you have to hand over an extra $1. And so this simply raises the fares on single trip purchases. It could be a truck, could be a passenger vehicle, could be a bicycle, could be a pedestrian. And so the results are pretty simple. You can see them here. If you wanted to add $1 a trip, the revenue would be about 20,000. If you charged it for pedestrians, I would argue that in the summer, the last thing you want to do is charge pedestrians. You want more pedestrians so the lines are shorter, so there's fewer cars. So the second one shows $2 a trip, but applied only to vehicles. Gets you a little more money actually than the single dollar applied to every class. And if you wanted to do what the state does, which is their peak summer is 25% increase in the fare, and apply it only to vehicles, you would gain about 43,000. The counter to that is how many people would you lose? In other words, if all of a sudden coming across on the ferry in the summer in my car, instead of it costing me $22, if it's up 25%, now it's going to cost me $26. Would I still come or would I stay home? And so how many of those passages would you lose? And that's the bottom calculation. You'd have to lose about 10% if with the $1, $2 trip level at the 25% trip level. If you lost 20%, you would come out even. In other words, if you lose any fewer than that, you're still going to make some money. Oh, yes. Only single fares, only single passage.
No, the surcharge is only on cash fare.
And it's not even a surcharge, it's just a different summer rate.
You're talking about. So you're talking about some surcharge, you're talking about cash here. Not the money.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we keep calling them cash fares and the ferry doesn't accept cash. So that's why I keep trying to avoid using cash fares, but oh well. All right, one last slide and I'm done. I want you to know that my analysis used ratios instead of just multiplying past prices. And so here are my ratios. And again, this will be on the handout, which I'll put over here by the door. And it will also be in the Island Library notebook and it will be in our minutes and everything else. But my whole thing is I would like to see our fare structure rationalized so that there's some reasonable relationship between the amount of space that the vehicle takes up on the ferry or the person and not. And that's it. But again, this is my plea. Let's take this opportunity that the executive is pushing onto us of changing the fares. Let's take this opportunity as a community and a committee to try and get the fares rebalanced. Thank you.
Okay. First, we'll hear from people in the hall, then we will hear from people on Zoom, and then we're going to move forward for the rest of our business. So Bob.
Like all of you, I'm trying to stop my head from spinning, so I can focus for a minute here. I have a quick question for the committee, and then I want to make my comment. Are you intending tonight to get a sense of the committee and the community on these proposals, or are you just informing us? Can somebody answer that? And I guess the follow-up is, are you on the 14th, are you going to be asking for the committee to vote something?
No. I had hoped tonight to have enough time to do more of an interaction, but we're running really late. And so in 2011, we actually did a town hall where people engaged in different suggestions, and we showed them how the fair's changed. And I would love to do that, but it would not be a committee function.
And the county executive, I believe, is going to request that Public Works brings forward fair hike in March.
Yeah, I think, Pam, that's right. You and I were at the same meeting, and the proposal is that they will come in on March 5th with their initial reading of a 15% something, and they will make a final vote on the 19th, which at that second meeting, although he left open the council's right to hold on a vote on the 19th. So it could be moved until April 9th. I'll just give you my feedback here. I think I really like the fact that you're achieving, Diane, I believe you told me that you achieved the equivalent of 15% without imposing 15% on categories, but rather you restructured the fares for pedestrians. They came down, cars and drivers went up and so on, but you are achieving, quote, the intended financial goal. Yes. I like that this committee is kind of taking charge of a much more sensible way to do it that will hopefully help the community. With respect to the proposals, I like reducing the pedestrian. Don't know if I'd go down to $5, but $6. I like increasing the car and driver, where a lot of your revenue is. And I also like reducing the percentage of discount. Currently, a car and driver gets a 33% discount if you buy 25 passes. I think that's too much. That's what I get, but I think that's too much. So I think there's revenue to be gained there. I don't know if you addressed that, Diane, in your proposal, but overall, I think it's a good direction. And I would finally say qualified by the fact that most people in this room know that the balance in the fare box is not accurate. It is understated by the amount of the cost of the Dolphins. It's understated by the amount of the cost of the ferry lease at minimum. And those add up to over $2 million. So on one hand, I'm just saying my personal opinion in reviewing the data is we do not have a crisis. We do not have a crisis. However, the perception and the fact is that the cash in the fund is such that that's how it's being understood. So I think we as a community should go, because of the reasons that Diane stated, because the costs haven't increased much. We should go forward in a collaborative way with something like this, and then get to serious work about the resolution that was passed here earlier to make sure that that 1.7 million comes back at some point into the fund, and that the Dolphins are appropriately resolved in favor of the fare box.
Ralph Steele. I just want to very briefly mention some of the numbers. I listened for 35 minutes to the council of the whole, and there was confusion. There were people stating numbers that were not correct. And as I go through about 6 numbers only, they're all county numbers. I'd like Diane to say either that's misleading or it's incorrect when I go through. So we ended up with a surplus at the beginning of 2023 of $1 million. Everybody agrees on that. We had a deficit of 750,000, which gives us an ending surplus of 250,000 at the end of 2023. Randy agrees with that. We all agree with that. And then we're talking about ARPA funds. If we get ARPA funds, the lawyer's taken a year to decide that we can accept them. 9 months ago, 8 months ago, 7 months ago, 360,000. That gives us 610,000 surplus. The deficit's projected very high at 675, basically taking up that surplus. If the dolphin issue or the capital issue for 1 year are resolved in our favor, there's a surplus at the end of 2024.
Yes.
I would like to know from the committee what there is in the code which triggers a fare increase and a rush. Elizabeth Cosa, Director Cosa, presented this graph with ARPA, no deficit and a very minor deficit in December. Sat Paul is talking about April, no money, no running the ferry. Rush. And there's larger areas of potential additions to the surplus. Talk about 1.9, talk about whatever you want. So I asked the question, what is the county using? What code are they using to trigger a fare increase in March or April of 2023?
Right, approaching it? Okay.
Do we have questions from Zoom as well? No. We don't have that. Well, we still have to build, we still have work we need to get that too.
Again, this is a discussion right now, but if we're going to limit it to some degree, we still have places we have to get to. And we're not making any final recommendation today.
I have a proposal that is not substantive, it's procedural.
This is not the open
Well-
session though, so this is about fares.
Oh, I thought we were in open session
We
now.
are not in open session.
Oh,
This is a
okay, well,
discussion
it's about the
fares.
fares. Okay, well, you know, well, mine dovetails at this point. What I was gonna say in open session dovetails with what Ralph was saying and what,
Motion or proposal that has to come in open session, that will be coming up, but we're not there yet. We have other
Okay.
stuff. We have-
well, I would just say, okay, well, on the way that incentivizes pedestrian traffic, and that is a progressive public transportation policy. You know, so and I really sympathize with what Ralph was saying and what Bob was saying at the very end about us going forward at this point with the with Sat Paul's proposal that's going to come in on March 5th, where he's going to ask for the 15% fare hike. It's important for us to know, and Ralph's question was, what is the basis? What is the legal basis by which Sat Paul is going to be operating on? And I think that's really important because we have an ordinance in place today. We don't have the revisions that have been talked about here in place today. Sat Paul's proposal on March 5th will have to be received, evaluated, and acted upon under the prescriptions of 1034 as it's written now. And the costs of the dolphins in 2022 and 2023 were incurred in those years. And they're sitting right now parked in our fare box. They were administratively put there in the fare box. And the minute that the county council adopts a fare hike predicated on Sat Paul's presentation, as he said, with his alleged or purported deficit starting April, that triggers the cost of those dolphins being put on the backs of every ratepayer on the island. And at that point in time, every ratepayer on this island is going to be injured financially by the burden of carrying those costs in the fare box, even though they are not by any way, shape, or form routine and regular. And so, you know, and my two proposals that are simply proposals by which this committee seeks some appropriate information to inform itself properly for when that proposal is received on March 5th from Sat Paul. And it would be, what would I call it? Appropriate and opportune for this committee to formally request from the county certain information. so that your work can be done intelligently with concrete, very clear information, and everybody understands what's going on. So you want me to wait until open session to talk
I
about that?
do, I do,
Okay.
because we've got other stuff we have to get through. Okay. We're going to move on with our agenda to, after our discussion with finances and codes, to a very important part. We want to appoint the ad hoc electric ferry and new docks committee. We've had a couple different ad hoc committees, and this committee is the KPFF, the consultants that the county hired, are already hard at work developing plans for how our new ferry is going to move forward. And we want to make sure that our committee has a place at the table during all of those discussions. So we have an in now, we know when these meetings are going to happen, and we need to put this ad hoc committee together. So I would like to appoint 2 members of the committee who to serve on the ad hoc ferry, electric ferry and docks committee that have both said that they would like to serve. Both Tom Philpott and Janice Cottrell said they would be willing to serve on that committee. There are 2 members of the community who have said that they would also be willing to serve on that committee, and that is Dave Parker and Kurt Esvalt. So at this point, I think the ad hoc committee will consist of those 4 members. I will also sit in as able on the meetings that KPFF is holding. All of their meetings are held by Zoom for the most part, so it'll be easier for people to attend them. Dave in particular is part-time in California, but is able to attend those meetings. So are there any comments from the community about this ad hoc committee?
What are they going to be studying?
They're going to be, they're going to be sitting in on the meetings that the county has with KPFF. According to Roland, they meet twice a month for about a 2-hour meeting as they're working through all this work. Then they will be reporting back to the committee about the work that's taking place so that we will know what's happening. We'll know which direction they're going. We'll know what they're looking at, you know, with all the decisions that are going to be made about size, propulsion, et cetera, et cetera. Because right now, you know, we're kind of out in the dark. They're also going to put together a list of solid questions for KPFF to answer when they come to our all community meeting in March on, in April, on April 11th. The 2 meetings that are coming up on March 14th are Randy Rydell is going to be doing a financial presentation. We're working with Randy actually to try to make sure we're all hopefully on somewhat the same page when he does that. And then on April 11th, the Public Works and KPFF will be here to answer questions for the community, to make a presentation on what they've done so far, and to answer questions that the ad hoc committee brings forward for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has any effort been made for purposes of continuity and accumulated knowledge? Has any effort been made to improve Charles Bailey?
Pardon me? I couldn't quite.
For purposes of continuity and not of knowledge about this subject of the new ferry, has any effort been made to recruit Charles Bailey to the committee?
Yes.
Actually, I have talked to him multiple times. He is on the county climate advisory committee. And so that's kind of his full-time job, but he is very interested and
He's been giving us information. Yeah, but he doesn't.
Meetings as observers only, or do they have some say in it?
You'll have to ask Roland, but it sounds like you will be observing the meeting. And then afterward, Roland said he would be available to the committee to answer any questions that weren't clear or to bring others forward. He said that the meetings are pretty big and there's a lot of information to cover. There's a lot of people there. So it's not a question and answer session at this point, but I don't know, you could see how as you bring it forward and you work with Public Works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Roland said that he really wanted to try to limit it to only 4 people. Just because it was like so great, Jim, but I'll
He
see.
can be on the ad hoc committee, he just might not be attending the meetings.
Oh, that's true. That's true. You could be on the, that is true.
Well, put it this way, I lost 8 like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
And-
know some things about this, that I think there's too many rose-colored glasses out there. And
Okay.
when it starts coming down to things, it may not be what it is.
We can absolutely add you on the ad hoc committee, Jim. So that will be a total of 5. That would be great. You bring a lot of expertise to that group.
WCFAC meetings are gonna be public meetings, right? I mean, anybody can go.
Pardon me?
Why wouldn't they? I don't know, I'm asking the question.
Uh,
I would assume
they
that
public
WCFAC
meetings?
meetings.
They are not public. No, they are not public meetings.
But I think that Mr. Dickinson would be able to help us frame questions.
I do. I absolutely do, Jim. You bring a lot of expertise to this process and thank you for offering. Okay, so those are the 5. So now we can move to open session. This open session may be we hope to adjourn by 7:30 instead of 8:30. Everybody's been here quite a bit longer.
When is the next ferry?
I can be real quick.
Isn't there one at 9?
There's one at 9, yeah.
Okay, so we have to be done by 7:50.
No,
Yeah.
we have to go. It was 8:30. 8:30.
Okay, at this point, we're going to look at the open session list, and the first person here to speak is Peter Earl.
Register. There you go. Okay. All right. Yeah, Ralph has circulated a piece of paper I've prepared. I have 2 basic requests that I think this committee should pursue. And this is building on the discussion that we had, that you guys had about the ferry fares. And in particular, the proposal that is going to come from St. Paul on March 5th for a 15% fare hike. And like I said before, that fare hike is predicated on the existing ordinance and is governed by the existing ordinance. And the issue of regular and routine is front and center. And it's going to be front and center because you can take, I believe, and I think everybody in this room believes, that the purported deficit that St. Paul cited that goes into effect in April is predicated on the presence of the $800,000 or approximate $800,000 dolphin expense being parked in our fare box. And we all have an idea about what that amount is and how it affects the existence of a deficit. But I think we need to have, and it's very important that we have very precise, undisputed information about that. People can nitpick with Ralph, they can nitpick with Diane, and how much of a deficit is there is a potentially fluid situation. And people who are used to dealing with numbers can make numbers do just about anything they want. So I propose that, and this is a simple, non-substantive request for information. I propose that WCFAC formally, by action of the group, vote to request from Public Works a financial analysis as of the fare box as it currently exists without including the dolphins. Take them out, because you're going to have the fare box as it exists on March 5th when Stat Paul makes his proposal, but that will include the dolphins. Okay, so by asking for that information in advance of that, this committee will be in a position to prepare itself and to share that information with the community, and we can have an intelligent discussion about what the impact of that fare box will be, and the extent of it. It'll inform our discussion, and I think it's important information. So I ask that you, are a member of this committee, make a formal motion to make the recommendation, not the recommendation, to make the request to Public Works for that. And the wording is in the, you can do whatever you want with the wording that I put on there. I just put what I thought would be the most convenient wording under number 1 in the piece of paper that's been distributed to you.
Okay, so let's stop here and do this now.
Okay.
And you can move on to
Sure,
the second thing. Is there someone on the committee that would like to make the motion that we request this information? You already have that?
No.
No. Do I have a second?
You do.
Which move, seconded? Is there discussion on the motion?
It's a good idea.
So all we're asking for
It's information.
them to do the math and look at this.
And put it on paper.
Okay, yeah, okay. I just want to understand.
You don't want to have a moving target.
Yeah.
You know?
All right. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so the motion that the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee and the County Council will be provided with financial analysis of the fare box as it currently exists without the inclusion of costs associated with the rebuild of the Dolphins in 2022 and 2023. If you would like to make this motion, right.
We're tired.
No, just also.
All those in favor?
All in favor of this motion, signify by saying aye. And all against. So the motion carries.
Okay, I have
Motion number 2.
Okay, yes, I have a proposal for WCFAC to approve a second motion that is also procedural. And I'll only make a couple of predicatory statements about that. You know, Rich's presentation of the of how to calculate the metric for calculating regular and routine is I think a very important piece of information, because it does show exactly how extremely aberrant the inclusion of those costs in the fare box are. It dovetails very nicely with Diane's wonderful scattergram that she had in I guess the meeting a 2 weeks ago, which showed them as being super aberrational. So any layperson's interpretation of what is regular and routine is premised on basic language and the US and the dictionary, right? I mean, it's plain language. And happily, the courts in this country, and almost every jurisdiction in this country, rely on a thing called the plain meaning doctrine. Unless it is a rule, a law, an ordinance or a statute that is highly technical in nature, and those are different. All statutes, all constitutions, all ordinances are governed by and taken by courts as under their plain meaning, and they resort to dictionaries to determine what those words mean, and they apply those words. Technical ordinances, they apply technical language to mean what technical language is. Okay, so what I'm asking for at this point is this committee has, well, this community has been pushing this question of regular and routine for over a year now. And the struggle began in Rich's artisan wine gallery in the winter and the late fall of 2022. So I'm proposing that that WCFAC give the county council advice to get a legal opinion about whether or not the $800,000 dolphin expense is, in the opinion of the prosecutor's office attorney who's from the civil division that's assigned to the council to provide the council with legal advice, that the council ask that office to provide them with that legal opinion.
Is that?
That's number two.
No, Royce is.
He was there yesterday.
Was he?
Yes, he was. He was,
Okay.
yeah.
So whoever it is,
Yeah.
maybe take out.
Yeah, you can take out the name and say, whoever the assigned attorney from the prosecutor's office is. But he was the one giving advice.
Because it's been.
Okay. And he's the one that had an executive session. Okay, so and the explanation is in the language below. So in order to expedite this matter, I would hope that you would make that motion and ask the county council to request a legal opinion. Yes.
How confident are we?
I'm pretty confident because, I've read a lot of case law. And this is from a legal perspective, this is a pretty simple situation. Regular routine has meaning, and it is against the canons of construction of ordinances and statutes for a legislative body to ignore language and nullify it in effect. Okay, good, thank you.
This is Tom Philpott. I'd like to make the motion that the Ferry Advisory Committee advise the county council to request a formal legal opinion from the council's attorney, who we believe is Royce Buckingham, of the legality under the chapter 10.34 of including the $800,000 dolphin rebuilds from 2022 and 23 in the fare box, given the clear and unambiguous meaning of the words regular and routine contained in that ordinance.
So, is there a second? Also. Is there discussion on the motion? Here's the heck out. I'm not a gambling person. What if they decide, and we have a lawyer who says, who disagrees with what we want them to work through?
You need to know that, because in the advice from the county council, it is, that it's legal for them to disregard the words regular and routine, or contort them such that they can admit to $800,000. The only recourse at that point, the council can take that advice, and they will go forward. But at that point, the issue will be tried legally, and there's. I'm a licensed citizen.
Okay, fine. I heard you. I heard lots. Yeah. Yes.
I think this needs to happen. I really don't want it to happen in the next 2 months.
Or it needs to happen before March 5th, because we don't do it before March 5th.
Discussion legal with the committee. The discussion is only with, yeah. If we do go to legal, it sure the heck is gonna happen in the next month. Delegate, so.
Option. Is it the last one?
Well, it's a concept, the next time we could advise the council.
The next time that we could advise the council in person would be on the 5th of March. We could, if we chose to do that. But again, I think we have to think clearly, about the pros and cons, definitely.
And Ben has a hand up.
Oh, great. Thank
Yeah, I'll
you.
get it. Just a second, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. We're gonna. Just 1 second.
Okay, Ben, go ahead.
Okay, and again, this is more a procedural type of comment, but I was under the impression that we were in the open session portion of the meeting, and at least when council does open session, it's a time for the council to listen to the community, and we don't typically make motions or even respond an incredible amount because it's time for the community to speak and us to listen. And did we move on past open session, or are we at new business or something like that? Because I heard the Mr.
Yeah.
Philpott making a motion, and I was just for an efficient meeting, I was wondering where we're at there.
Yeah. This is indeed the open session. And we do have more speakers, so why don't I thank you, Ben, for that feedback. And I think we will go forward and listen to the rest of the speakers, and then we'll see how much time we have to get back to the next question. There's a motion and a second already made.
Yes.
So in the future, Ben, that is indeed what we'll do. I think we have to go forward with this motion right now. Thank you.
Well, and one more quick
Is there any more
question.
discussion on the motion?
One more quick question,
All right.
point of order.
All in favor of requesting this information from the county, signify by raising your hand. Right. 1, 2, 3. All. Were you up or no? Are you up, Rich? Okay. So it's 3 for the motion, all against the motion. Three against the motion and 1 abstention. Let the record show. All right, next on, after Peter Earl is Bob Anderson. Bob, you're next.
Open session.
For the open session.
I really have nothing more to say. A lot has been said tonight. I'm only going to say to this committee, soldier on. No, seriously, you've done a lot of hard work tonight. Some of this is new, it's complicated, and you should feel good about that. You moved toward the goalpost, and I think you've created some important messages for the executive and for the council, and those messages will be registered in the next couple of weeks. So I applaud you, even if it was messy tonight. We can all sort of use that word. It was good hard work. Thank you for your work.
So we've got people on Zoom.
Wait, there's more on open session.
Just 1 second. Next is Janice Holmes.
Oh.
Yes, I would just, this is on something not discussed tonight, but it's about dry dock. And I'm pretty upset and angry at how the county is approaching how we, the citizens of the island, are supposed to handle transportation during dry dock. Now, yes, there's a walk-on ferry, but the county really has made little to zero effort to arrange to reduce the impact to the residents of Gooseberry Point, or to provide the residents of Lummi Island with a place to leave a car over there to be able to do business, shop, go to work, whatever. A friend of mine recently went across trying to find a place to park, and somebody over there said they would charge her $850 for a month's parking during dry dock. And this is someone who has to get to town for medical treatment right now. And this is something that a solution needs to be worked out, but it needs to be government to government. It needs to be county government, with Lummi Nation government, to see what other options there are for arranging better parking during dry dock. And this is just the preliminary. This is a 1-month dry dock, not a 6-month dry dock. And it's already difficult to find and make arrangements to have transportation once you get off the island. And it's simply not right. And right now, during our dry dock, we have a shuttle that runs around the island, and about 98% of the time it's empty. But why not repurpose that shuttle on the mainland and perhaps run it to some place that the Lummi Nation could support for parking with security, so that we would have reasonable transportation once we got off the island? Yes, there is a bus. It runs limited. It does not match up with the ferry schedule. And again, that's a government to government discussion. That's not something, I can't go to the Lummi Nation and say, gee, please help us out here. That's government to government, and the government is abdicating their responsibility and just leaving us. They're closing our road and basically saying, find your own way. And that's it. And that's not good enough. So.
Thank you, Janice. Next speaker is Mary Ross.
Yes. Mary Ross is passing her spot. The next speaker
Is, well, excuse me, Mary Ross is passing her spot. The next speaker is Jim Dickinson.
Well, this is timely. For about 15 years, there's been a legal passenger ferry in Seattle, passenger car ferry, called the Trek. The owner has repeatedly tried to get Whatcom County to hire it for dry dock. At one time, he even got onto the thing, was the contingent low bidder, and the ferry director of the time said, oh, we just need a little more information. This is after the bid, tells the county council, so it doesn't qualify, never didn't give the guy a chance to even answer. And I said, you know, that's illegal. You could sue them. And he said, I don't want to sue the people I might be working for. Well, he might as well have, because it never happened. The Trek is a T-class licensed ferry, approximately the same size as Whatcom Chief, has 16 car Washington State Ferry standard car legality, which the Whatcom Chief does not, meets the current loading and egress specifications of the CFR, and 1824 inches of passage space between automobiles. It's a straight on run. It's got 2 real nice deck cabins, one upstairs, one downstairs. Downstairs one meets ADA, and an outside viewing platform. It's more maneuverable, just a seaworthy, well powered, and less noisy than the Whatcom Chief. We took a number of years ago, my brother and I and Tom Philpott and some others, got the fellow to bring it up here, collected barely enough money to pay him, and took a run around Lummi Island. It was very successful, except not one county person showed up. And people loved it. You could actually stand on the deck and talk to each other. And that was the end of that. Nothing ever happened again, as usual. Some reason the same guy keeps getting the dry dock service. Now, but the thing is that the Trek people are not interested in backing us up all the time. They can't get here in time. But this is kind of an emergency thing. We wouldn't have to pay for the float, the stripes, the passenger bus, the other infrastructure. And the passenger boat brings in just a fraction of what the Whatcom Chief does. And we know at least they're leaving $60,000 on the table, at least. Because I have never been able, even the whole time I was with WCFAC, to be able to get the county to tell me what the cost of the local dry dock is. They'll tell you what the cost of the ferry boat is, but they won't tell you what this is. And I saw one once back in the Frank Abart administration when they were changing accountants. And from what I remember, it was shocking. And the next thing, the ramps are way too steep. We got an ADA problem. They're too steep for any of the normal things. You wouldn't have to pay for a place to park. And the response we're likely to get is gonna be no. They're gonna claim that they've already got a contract, therefore they're gonna go through with it. I'm saying, okay, work a contract with the local people to stand by, hire this thing. Increase of safety, no parking, none of the normal things. And you're gonna have a little bit, there's gonna be some people who are gonna have to walk, because it's not quite as big, or at least. And county never have truly investigated the truck. Now, I talked to the owners, they're amenable right now, they're talking amongst each other. And if somebody says yes, they'll bring it up here and give it a try.
Thank you, Jim.
So, they want this, they can.
I would encourage you to talk to Gary Poole as well.
He was actually one of the people who went and looked at it one time. I don't know what Richie did not want it.
Yeah, I would talk again. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, at this point, we've worked our way. I'll thank you everyone for your patience. We've worked through the agenda. I just want to call your attention again to upcoming meetings on March 14th with Public Works Accountant Randy Rydell. We don't know at this point if Randy will be coming out to the island or if they will be able to supply us with a Zoom hybrid meeting in Bellingham. If they are, we're going to have the meeting in Bellingham. People are welcome to come there in person or they can sign on to the Zoom link. After that, April 11th, Public Works and KPFF will be here on the island to tell us what their work thus far has given them to, they're gonna talk about pretty much all the different avenues of what's going on, the docks, predictions, what the size of the ferry might be, what the propulsion system will be, everything that they've worked on so far, and everything, they will try to answer the questions that the ad hoc committee posts for them. And with that, I thank you for your time and we will adjourn this meeting.
Yay.
Wow.
Thank you, Pam.